Hey everybody, I'm Tammy Kiekefer. I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
My name is Desiree Grimaldi, and welcome to Unguarded Minds, the unfiltered podcast that dives deep into the rough waters of life. We are your fearless guides through the drama, trauma, and all of the craziness that life throws at you. Today, we are so excited. We have a special guest, Dr. Carlos. Welcome. Dr. Carlos is a clinical psychologist, coach, and speaker who is dedicated to helping individuals unleash their full potential through high performance counseling, coaching, and consulting. He is the founder of the Mastery Group, a company that provides individuals and organizations with the tools to take their leadership and performance to the next level. He is also the founder of Tampa Counseling and Wellness, a private practice that provides therapy and wellness services to individuals looking to positively transform their lives. Dr. Garcia received his doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Nova Southeastern University and completed his residency at Rutgers University. Dr. Garcia also served in the armed forces in the United States Marines and a firefighter and paramedic prior to receiving his doctorate degree. In your years of experience in both military and professional organizations, you teach individuals how to become more masterful leaders and performers, and your passion lies in helping others grow and create meaningful and lasting changes in their lives. And you strive to help people who utilize their natural talents to build happier and more successful lives, a true catalyst for those looking to achieve peak results. We are so excited to have you here.
So happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you both for having me.
So let's dive in. You have
Mm.
a super impressive history, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
With that background that you have, you really like to focus on people who are military or first responders, men and women, but men, I think, have the stigma of kind of holding everything in. And I would think that people on the front lines really need somebody to talk to and work through everything they've seen more than anybody else. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the best way to sort of speak to that is talking about my own sort of experience. I talk a lot about having struggled a lot with anxiety and depression through most of my 20s and my early 30s. And that a big part of that was this still very deep narrative that we have in our culture about men not being allowed to express our emotions, right? Or if we are allowed, it's sort of anger. That one's okay, but sadness, grief, shame, like all of that other stuff is not okay. I talk about having grown up with a Hispanic father who had been in the military in Cuba. And so, right, it was this message of like, suck it up, boys don't cry, right? So you just learn to develop this like real sense of like shame around those kinds of emotions, sadness and other things. And so it doesn't get modeled for you how to deal with those emotions in a healthy way. At the same time, again, that sort of deep sort of shame around like, oh, this is not okay. And then I went right from high school into the military. So it was another almost 8 years of this culture and mentality of like, rub dirt in it, just keep going. Which is, around the time when my anxiety and depression symptoms started. And then I go right into a job on the fire department, right? And as a paramedic. And so here I had spent this lifetime where on the surface, you looked at Carlos Garcia and like he had it together, right? But on the inside, it was just like I was getting eaten up from the inside with my emotions. Anger like you wouldn't imagine, because what do you think is going to happen to any human being that you ask to repress the all of the series of emotions for that long of a time? And so it was spilling out in my relationships. I couldn't keep a healthy relationship. I was drinking a lot, probably just engaging in a lot of unhealthy behaviors and not going to therapy because I didn't want to be considered weak, or I didn't want to be I don't want to be the problem, right? Um, and so now I get to use a lot of that sort of my own experience in helping men and women, but like you said, a lot more with men, Desiree, to kind of understand how this might have played out in their life and how their life in the military or as a police officer, as a fireman, might have impacted the narratives that they now hold about who they're supposed to be, right, as men in the world, or as caretakers, or as rescuers, right?
Yeah, so I have
Sorry.
family that has been first responders on my side and my husband's side. And I think like a lot of people, they'll see, I don't know, Chicago PD or Chicago Fire or like all these shows.
Yeah.
And they almost just don't take that time to really understand what it's like for that person to show up to real life scenes and see these kind of things. My brother-in-law, he's a cop, and I'm like, I don't know how you go home at the end of the day and like not lock your kids in a room after everything you've seen. And he's very good about it, and it might be some suppression, I'm not sure, but he's very good about leaving it at the door and not bringing it into the family, which I could never do. I'd be like, you're never leaving the house ever.
Yeah.
But people just not realizing like how hard that is day in and day out. Kind of like I refer to it as like correctional officers. It's like you're willingly going to jail every day.
Totally.
Like you've done everything in your life to not go to jail, but you're willingly going every single day. So it's like you're a precautious person and you're smart and you're making the right choices, but then you just day after, that's got to be so exhausting mentally, emotionally. I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several components to speak to there. I think it's less about sort of what the job does to the person, and it's almost like the caliber or type of person that tends to lend themselves to this type of work, right? So people that go into this sort of line of work, again, whether it's a first responder, the military, they usually have a pretty good ability to compartmentalize, right? To, go through and have a really hard shift, but come home at the end of the day and not sort of put that on anyone else, right? To kind of just hold that in. I think that there's some healthy ways to do that, right? Like even as a therapist, if I've had a really rough day of sort of being, a therapist and listening to all the hard things I listen to, the last thing I want to go do is go and sort of put that on my family, right? So I do acknowledge that a part of that I need to hold. It's about developing the sort of skills and the healthy coping patterns so that when I am compartmentalizing, it's in a more healthy way, that I can find outlets for all of the emotions and feelings that we hold when we go on really tough calls. Because I do believe this, ladies. I do believe that like most of us come into the world with a deep sense of compassion and empathy. Like we're just kind of born with that in our DNA. I don't think we were meant or to live in this world where we were constantly exposed to war, to death, to that's just not okay for the human psyche and the emotions. But we have to do these jobs, right? So I think a certain amount of compartmentalizing is okay, but are we, right, when does it start to lean in over to this like pushing down, this repressing, this like I don't want to deal with this, where it starts to, I use this analogy of like the pressure cooker, right? That you just keep adding more pressure to it, but there's no valve, there's no relief valve. Eventually that's going to seep out somewhere. So how do we start learning how to have those healthy relief valves so that, again, the compartmentalizing is in a healthy way?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were in the military for the 8 years, did you see people compartmentalizing all over the place? I agree. I think we have to compartmentalize for one, survival skills, but also just to maintain after you've had a long day of working with clients. But back then in the military, well, and growing up, you were told compartmentalize to a degree of more unhealthy compartmentalize, I guess, repression. What did you see? Did you see people just starting to break down? Did anyone ever get together in smaller groups and just like express some emotion? Like, how did that look in your 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways that it traditionally looks like in some of these roles is, right, the dark humor, right? Like our fire department and even in the military, I can remember like we would just make the most cruel and unusual jokes, right? And to an outsider, that's like, oh my God, like that's barbaric, right? Like what planet do these people come from? But it was almost like a coping style. It was almost like if we can joke about this, we can lighten the load of it. And I think that that's also part of why there's such a powerful camaraderie, right? Because you would go off in a group with people that you trusted and you would talk about the stuff, right, in a way that still felt manly, if you will. But yeah, I think for a lot of folks, when it got heavy enough, um, you'd find yourself having conversations around a campfire. You'd find yourself having conversations around some beers, right, and things like that. Which again, we can look at as healthy or not healthy, but like to me, it was just important that there was an outward expression of what we tended to bottle up. I work with a lot of first responders, police officers, and firemen now, and veterans. And what I sort of explain to them is like, look, there are moments, right, where, um, it, there are mission objectives, maybe, right? There's a call that we're going to go on where there isn't an opportunity to just sit and, well, this is how I'm feeling about this thing, right? That's the kind of compartmentalizing I'm talking about. But what are we doing afterwards, right?
Mhm.
How are we
The
taking
debrief.
the debrief,
Yeah.
right? And oftentimes in a lot of departments, a debrief is like, hey, everybody good? Well,
Move on.
yeah, that's not really right. What kind of space do we need to sort of cultivate so that people find the safety to be able to have these conversations? And I think that speaks a little bit more to your question, Tammy, is what I see more often than not, um, is, you know, it comes to the cultural narrative of men and who they're supposed to be and how we're supposed to handle emotions, and it's so toxic, right? Like the healthiest version of me started to show up in my life when I started to allow myself to cry, when I started to allow myself to deal with shame or turn towards it, or grief, or whatever hard things were arising. When I started to sort of see that I didn't have to be afraid of those emotions, or that they were going to take over, or that I wasn't going to be able to handle it. That's more of what I saw, was just men that were sort of like, hey, this isn't okay. This isn't okay to talk this way. This isn't okay to express this way. And that's sort of where I have become really inspired to get out there and talk about mental health in the lives of men, and the ways that we should be sort of taking a look at that.
So a step further to what you just said, a part of it, and I don't know 100%, so it's a question more than anything, but isn't it also scary for people in that line of work to talk about it, because you have like psych evaluations and things after certain things that you could potentially lose or be suspended from your position. So it's like, even if you want to, now you're fearing loss of income, loss of position, respect. I mean, there's so many levels of it. Like if you were raised that way, but then what the department expects of you, or the military, or whoever, like you have to appear on paper to be 100% stable, or you could be out of a job.
Yeah. Excellent point, Desiree. This is it's not just a cultural issue, it's a systemic issue. And those systems being, the military, the departments, right? Where, and I get it, right? As a police officer, if you're unstable, here you are carrying a firearm out in public, right? Like, that's a big liability for obviously the person, for the department. Within the military, right? Like, we want people that are sound of mind in those very delicate positions to handle really delicate situations. So I get it. But right, the deeper narrative is like, oh, if you have something that you're dealing with, it can cost you your rank, it can cost you your position, it can cost you the way people are going to see you and view you as weak, and sort of not not to be in the position of leadership that you're currently in. So again, I don't think it's like that we need to change all of that, but let's have better outlets. Let's have places where we can openly feel that we can go and talk about our stuff, so that when we do come back to the line of duty, we're not carrying all of this stuff around as part of our work, right? There's a place where we have gone and sort of dumped some of that, if you will. But yeah, it's there's so many layers to all of this that is what's creating the problem, per se.
So being proactive would almost be more beneficial than reactive, because when you see news headlines and stuff, and of course exaggerated drastically, but it's like, well, what happened? Where did this come from? They were so, but it's like, no, they weren't. You just didn't care. The signs were on the wall.
Right.
You know, but if it was like in a perfect world, if it was a requirement, like, okay, therapy is mandatory when you start this position, or, you know, group therapy, you know, or whatever, like something, or even something quarterly, because I mean, you obviously have the choice of seeing a therapist on your own time, but again, trying to break that first, you know, expectation around men, of not even doing that. If it was a requirement, it would kind of just open their eyes for the fact that it's okay.
Yeah.
And then even
I think there's also another sort of piece that we haven't spoken about, which is still the stigma that we carry around mental health and mental wellness.
Mhm.
Right? For a lot of people, it's still like, oh, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. No, it's not about that. It's about learning the skills to navigate certain emotional and psychological things in life, right? But there's still you know, this ginormous sort of taboo around what it means to go see a therapist, and I think that gets in the way too, right? You know, I work for this company as a contractor. They're called O2X, and you know, what this company has sort of realized is that these tactical athletes is what they call them, right? Your first responders, firemen, Secret Service, government agencies, like they could really benefit from a deeper understanding of how emotions and psychology works in order to better navigate these things. And so, you know, they come into these different departments across the country and educate folks on mental health, educate folks on yoga, meditation, like, right, the tools that we can use to better handle the emotional stuff of life, right? I love the way, you know, I love this podcast that you all are doing. It's real, it's raw. Like, that's the thing about life. It's going to kick you in the teeth at some point. I don't care who you are, right? But if you have a job where you're constantly exposed to being kicked in the teeth, maybe you need some more tools, some better skills to handle that stuff, so you're not walking around like, you know, just carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders.
And I love that.
And
And
I, yeah.
that's why we love doing it, is to
Yeah.
hear different perspectives, because everybody has opportunity to grow. For a long time, I was guilty. I mean, he's only 11, so not too long, but for a while I was guilty with my son. I'm like, get over it. Like, rub that dirt in. And now I have changed my way with him of, it's okay to have those emotions, but we can't live there, because
Totally.
I noticed the difference between like my daughter and him is he'll sit in it and he turns angry, as opposed to my daughter will just cry. She'll break down differently. But so for me, it's important to teach him, like, it's cool, be mad, be upset, cry about, you know, whatever, but you can't live there and let it control and dictate those next steps. So we love having guests like you on. I mean,
I
we
love
all
that.
have opportunity to grow and learn new tricks.
I love that. I mean, I'll share something about that in particular, because a lot of the work I do as a therapist is very rooted in attachment and early development, right? And so, like, a lot of us got that message from our parents very early on, right? But it was fear-based. It was somehow like, oh, if you sit with your emotions, somehow you're not going to be okay, or you'll wallow, or you're being, you're sitting in pity. Like, there's all these narratives that we have. Sitting with my emotions, whether it's sadness, shame, guilt, grief, overwhelm, stress, has been the best thing I have ever learned how to do. But we have this like fear that somehow facing that or being with that is going to turn us into some sort of lazy sap that we'll never sort of get out of it. I think we need to be careful about, not just with children, but in society, this like narrative that we have that we need to immediately move from the hard emotion. Because I have an 18-month-old, and what my wife, who's also a therapist, what we try to do is, like, if he's feeling sad or upset or frustrated, it's like, okay, be frustrated with this. Cry it out. Let's talk through what this is coming up for you. Because the second we're like, no, you're okay, everything is fine, then what kind of space or what kind of modeling or what kind of opportunities are we giving this child to learn how to handle emotions when, his first girlfriend or boyfriend, breaks up with them or cheats on him, or they lose their first job, right? Now we're going to go to what we learned when we were younger. Oh, this is not okay. Let me bury this down. So I think just as a culture, and I get it, right? Like we were raised by parents who needed to be much tougher. They grew up in different generations and different eras. But I think we need to be super mindful about how we pass on that message to our own kids. That again, I've never gone into sadness and had it crumble my whole life.
Right.
No, it's usually the best thing that I can do for myself, because I learn how to be with sadness and then move on with more resilience and more toughness than I've ever had before.
And there's that fear of opening those floodgates.
Yeah.
And I think when you're told to keep it in, you don't want to do that because you're afraid of what's going to actually come out. And it's easier to be angry than it is to be scared. It's
Oh,
easier to be defensive than it is to be vulnerable.
totally.
And so then all of a sudden, yeah. And it's just so frustrating when just going back to, telling people, suck it up, or you're going to lose your job, or you're going to lose a rank, or you're going to lose a promotion. And I just, I would love to get into the minds of people who are making these rules, because would you rather have a whole bunch of people who have a high rank that are a ticking time bomb? Or would you rather have someone at a high rank who, like you're saying, understands emotions and is able, like, it's so frustrating, whether you're on the front lines, whether you're, a pilot. I've got a
Totally.
client who wants to get his pilot's license,
Yeah.
but because he's been in therapy, he can't, and he'd be an excellent pilot.
Right.
And it is, I just don't understand the thinking behind that.
Yeah, Tammy, I'll take it one step further, because another sort of population that I've kind of leaned into in the last several years is entrepreneurs and business owners. And I started to see a lot of the overlaps. Again, another sort of culture where you wear as a badge of honor your ability to just kind of tough through it and barrel through it, and then just seeing how that looks then in leadership, seeing how employees suffer, companies suffer because of
it comes from the top down, right?
It comes from the top down.
No matter
And
what
It
industry
always travels
or
downstream.
family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how do we, right? Like the sort of narrative that I want to get out there is that, by turning towards these things that are difficult psychologically and emotionally, we learn to navigate them and we build our resilience, right? Like anytime I give a talk, I ask in the audience, like, has anyone here ever had to deal with fear? Right? Has anyone ever struggled with anything? And like the common theme always is that if you are a human being, that is natural to your life, because we're all going to experience it. So why are we hiding behind these masks of shame around our struggle? Instead of sort of bringing it out and showing how strong we can become, how resilient we can become. And again, it's those leaders, whether in the military or, in the fire department or anywhere in a company, that best know how to navigate themselves emotionally and psychologically, that I most want to be led by, that are doing the greatest work, that can lead people best. Right?
Well, you respect them. You respect them because they're respecting themselves by saying, hey, I'm pretty sad right now, or I'm overwhelmed, or my stress is causing me so much anxiety right now. You respect that because you relate with it.
It's authentic.
But if someone's saying, you're going to get demoted, or go over there and cry, or whatever it is, you don't respect that. But then you start second guessing yourself. It's almost like this weird gaslighty thing.
Yeah.
I think that we have two extremes happening too. Like you have people who, I can't think of better words, but like are a complete shit show, and they're glorifying certain mental health or whatever issues. Then you have the people who are scared to death to even consider going. And then you kind of have the people in the middle who it's nobody's business. You don't have to wear a label. Nobody even has to know you go. Like, so I just feel like it's so torn between like this whole everybody and everything needs a label on it versus like, yes, our parents did a lot of things wrong in the culture that we grew up in, the time we grew up in. but I really liked it when like everything stayed in the home. Like
Mhm.
your politics, your financials, your religion, your health stuff. Like you don't have to glorify it. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to go announce it to the world on TikTok. Go to therapy. Nobody
Yeah.
has to know if you're uncomfortable with it, and
Yeah.
you can still get help. And I think
Yeah.
that that's a struggle too, is I don't know, because it frustrates me when I see people like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
glorifying the mental health side of things. Um,
Totally.
with a trendy TikTok dance. I'm like, that's gross.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts on that. I don't love the way the field of psychology sort of approaches mental health, to be quite honest. That's probably a whole other podcast episode. But years back when we sort of shifted to try and um, adopt this medical model to human beings with emotions and brains, the most complex sort of organism ever, I think we had a big fail there, because it became this idea of like, let's check off the boxes and the symptoms so that we can give you this label, right? And I think people that have maybe experienced a life of very little validation or not ever being seen or understood or heard are more likely to attach to anything, even if it's negative, as a, hey, look at me, right? And I think what has happened, I think that's sort of what you're speaking to, what we see on sort of TikTok and stuff. I use this story to help sometimes folks understand, because I also train a lot of therapists, and a lot of them will come to me super frustrated because their client isn't moving, right? Or moving fast enough, or like they want to stay stuck in their depression. And I'm like, it's not that. No one wants to stay stuck in their depression. That's not real. Like deep down inside, that's not really where somebody wants to be. Um, a couple of months back, I was with my son out in the garden and he fell. And he just kind of took a spill and he started crying. But he was perfectly okay, right? And so anybody that's been around children or has children has probably witnessed this before. But he walked over to where I was and showed me his arm, right? And there was like a couple of leaves on it. And I was like, "You're okay, buddy." And I just rubbed his arm. He made eye contact with me and then he just scampered off. He was okay. He just needed his pain, his situation acknowledged. And what I have come to see in my work with clients that most therapists would say are stuck in their whatever, is if you really listen, if you shift from this place of like, hey, let's fix you, let's get you out of here, where you are is not okay, and you allow space for their stuff, for their pain, for their deep traumas to be seen and acknowledged, they will start pulling themselves out without me having to give them the tools. Because I believe that, like, deep down inside as human beings, we all want to be better. We want to have the best possible lives for ourselves. It's just that some of us have had, psychologically in the first developmental years of our lives, such um, deep emotional abandonment or misintunement from our caretakers, that then we're seeking that out in the world as adults, either in the cars that we drive, how much money we're trying to make, the titles we're seeking, the how many likes we're getting on social media. All of that to me is this deep need for validation that we didn't receive at some point in our lives. But I also get it, right, Desiree? It's like at some point we need to acknowledge that as real, as our stuff, and move past it. But I also see why people get stuck in it. I see both versions of it, and it can be really frustrating at times.
Mhm.
Helping people really get that internal sense of validation versus relying on the external to make them feel happy. And I
Yeah,
think that you're right. Like, the people who are seeking that external validation, there's almost no boundaries, where you could look at them and just, I mean, like your heart goes out to them because you can see how bad they're suffering internally and they're just needing that external validation. And it works, if you get a like or if you get the attention or the whatever, it's like, oh, that makes me feel so good. But then it goes away like a cloud, it
right.
kind of comes in and it goes out. And it you just, yeah. So, and I think just going back to what you were talking about, no matter what industry you're in, whether you're allowed to talk about your mental health issues, whether you're allowed to talk about your emotions, whether you're not allowed to, I think I'm hearing you say that people have to figure out what that first step is for them to heal, to acknowledge, to, whether it's in their private home journaling, whether it's reading podcast audio, whatever, like find your thing that works for you, as long as you can acknowledge emotions that you have and give
Totally.
yourself permission. And then that kind of unfolds as their own journey.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the entry point was books. Like I was such an angry sort of teenager that like I was like, oh my, like, who is this? This is not in line with like the part of me that's a compassionate, caring human and friend. And so in reading that book, it's like, oh, you might have depression or anxiety. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? I mean, I didn't want to look at it immediately, but eventually I was like, if I want this anger to go away, I need to take a look at what's underneath it, right? For some people, the entry point is therapy. For some people, the entry point is plant medicine. For some people, the entry point is breath work. For some people, the entry point, especially, we've been talking about like veterans and first responders. There's camping trips, there's fishing trips, right?
Mhm.
There's these different sort of platforms that we can sort of turn to so that we can take a closer look at what might be going on for us. And so what I tell everybody is like sort of trust your journey and where it takes you, but start somewhere, right? Don't keep trying to white knuckle life, because it's gonna win. It's gonna win.
What was that? Because you're right. Once that first step happens, where you go on the camping trip, or you go on or you read the book, but you've got to go find the book first. You've got to want to find the book. What was your turning point from recognizing, like, I'm this angry person? What helped you go, I don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell you it was this like epiphany, beautiful angel moment where I had this realization. It was,
Usually it's not
I
pretty.
was, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was
You just,
tired
yeah.
of my anger destroying the people around me, of me hurting people that I loved, of having the most trivial, minuscule things keep me in this place of like anger in my body for hours at a time. I was like, this is toxic. Like this is gonna kill me early if I don't do something about it. So
So
for
it's like
me, I think it's
consequences.
yeah, it was just the
that
consequences and like, God, I like this, I don't want this in my life anymore. So again, just being sick and tired of being sick and tired.
It's exhausting. It's
Oh,
exhausting to hold
yeah,
that kind of emotion. Like, I
yeah,
don't think some people who don't suffer with it per se don't understand, like, it's it's mentally exhausting, it is physically exhausting. You can't eat, you're not sleeping, you're not doing my husband, his thing, like if I'm like, oh, I'm having really bad anxiety, he's like, when's the last time you worked out? I'm like, shut up, it'll go away. But
yeah,
like that's his outlet. That work, hands down, he will go to the gym for 2 hours and come back a completely different person. Everybody has their different way of handling it. And
yeah,
I mean, I think the importance, like you keep stressing, is doing something. I mean, they say that's the pure definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. You have to do something, whether you get up and go for a walk,
yeah,
you go get coffee with a friend, you start going to the gym, you reach out to a like whatever it is, you have to do something.
Take that first step.
yeah,
Baby steps, but that
yeah,
first step.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Was it
yeah.
Mel Robbins? She had
Whether
like that 5-second rule that she
right,
practices.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. We're also learning so much about the sort of gut brain connection, and so kind of the foods that we're eating, right? How's exercise impacting our mood, right? Like there's so many different places where we can start, but start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're not ready to start or don't know how, reach out to someone who can help you. There's 800 numbers, there's anonymous lines, there's
There's so
always
many
ways
anonymous
to
ways
take.
to find help these days.
Yeah.
Um,
I think too, it's also about understanding, right? We have to educate the public.
Big time.
Um,
Mhm.
a lot of the times the conversations is around mental health, mental health. And I think even in using that word, most people are like, okay, mental health, I get it. But for me, it's about psychological and emotional wellness, right? For me, a part of therapy is if you're feeling anxiety or depression or PTSD in some point in your life, let's get you back to baseline. But then how do we get you to live a better life? Right. And so, like, a lot of clients will come to me and say, like, oh, there was no trauma in my past. There's nothing really to look at. And there's a little story, if you don't mind me sharing, that I used for people to sort of illustrate how we're not always necessarily looking for trauma. We're looking for critical events in our childhood, right? And the story is the following. Here's a child that's going out to eat with their parents. They go out to eat every Friday. And on this particular Friday, the parents say, okay, we're going to let you choose what you want to eat. So the 7 or 8 year old little child gets all excited, right? Like, finally, mommy and daddy aren't making the decision for what they're going to eat. They get to the restaurant, open the menu, and see this big, delicious, cheesy pizza. And they're like, I want the pizza. And then one of the parents chimes in, honey, are you sure? Why don't you get the burger? That's what you always get. So the little child stops and thinks about it for a moment. Says, oh, that's kind of true, but sticks to their choice, the pizza. And then that parent chimes in one more time, honey, are you sure? What if you don't like the pizza? You know, the burger's the safe bet. Little child stops, thinks about it one more time, but sticks to their guns, the pizza. And then the other parent chimes in, we're not getting the pizza, it's too big, you're not going to eat it all, it's going to be a waste of money. So the child's like, okay, I'll get the burger. So in the grand scheme of things, nothing traumatic transpired. But my question to folks in that instance is, like, in that moment, what do you think that child believes about their ability to make decisions?
They
They're
can't do
incapable.
it.
Maybe I
Mhm.
can't make good decisions. Maybe I need to check with others, some version of that. Now, you might tell me, okay, Carlos, that 7 or 8 year old is not going to have that adult rational thought. No, but they sense something. And what we also know about parenting is that it's pretty consistent over time. So that child probably heard a similar message around school, the way they dress, sports, piano, ballet, whatever. Do you imagine over time that there is a likelihood that that child might start to develop a little bit of mistrust of their own thoughts and emotions, a little bit of self-doubt when making choices? If that continues to get reinforced over time, by the time they're 15 or 16, do you think that that can impact their self-esteem? The kind of choices that they make in the world, the kind of risks that they take, the kind of friends they gravitate to, the kind of relationships that they get into? Absolutely.
Mhm.
So with all of my clients, if there's trauma, let's look at that. But let's just look at what were the environments that we grew up in and the messages that we adopted without even knowing, unconsciously, because those mold who we become later in life. The ideas and beliefs and narratives that we carry about the world, about other people, and about ourselves. So for me, mental health is all about discovering, like, why you are made up the way that you are psychologically and emotionally, and doing the work that you need to do so that you can live a life of joy, of fulfillment, where you have healthier connections, where you're not sort of pushing people away inadvertently, right? Like, let's bring the unconscious to the conscious. And so I wanted to share that story for any folks that are out there
Okay.
listening, kind of being like, oh, there's no trauma in my past. I have nothing to look at, nothing to worry about.
Mhm.
You just made me second guess all my parenting. Just
Got me too. I'm like, yeah, fail, fail, fail. Just
But
kidding.
it
I
isn't
do.
about
I
that,
mean,
right? Like, we're all going to fail as parents because we're
Yeah.
all working through our own stuff. Like, eventually, after I got past the anger of how, the sort of trauma that was in my own home growing up, because of my parents' failed marriage, um, once I got past the anger, it was like, oh, like, they were just living out their own traumas and their own stuff from, one of them having lost their mother when they were young and the other one having lost their father when they were 8. Like, they didn't know any better. So it's not about, like, pointing fingers. We're all going to screw up,
Yeah.
but how do we do it with, like, more conscious awareness and more love, right? Come to it with more compassion.
And it all
no, we have
comes from somewhere. So
Yeah,
yeah, when you
totally.
can open up and talk about it,
Totally.
then you can have more compassion to whoever you feel like did you wrong. Because it's like, oh, there's a reason for that. Okay, I get it. And then it's your choice and your ability and your energy commitment to change what you know and do it differently going forward.
Because to Desiree's point, if I don't take the time to figure out where my anger comes from, the actual roots of it, I can go through life being like, well, I'm angry and it's my parents' fault. So like the hell with you, right? And every relationship that I destroy, well, it's because I'm an angry person or I'm a Scorpio or whatever other thing we, we tend to sort of align with, right? Like, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yeah.
I tell my kid, I think a lot of it too is ownership. I mean, with my background, and I tell more so my 15-year-old, we have the deeper conversations, but I tell her all the time, I'm like, I'm doing the best I can. But
Yeah.
when you grow up, like if you feel like something was traumatizing to you, I can't argue that. Like you're the only one that's going to know
Right.
if that was traumatizing. And the day that you come to me and say, this traumatized me, I'm going to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Not, I'm sorry, but not, these excuses.
That's so
All
empowering.
I can do is say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so, even just acknowledging we're not perfect. And I was like, you're going to screw up your kids too. In one way or another, it's going to look different than the way that, maybe something I did wrong but there's no manual. And if there's anything you can count on, it's change. And the world is always changing. Me and Tammy talk about it a lot. Like we'll never understand what our kids are going through. We didn't have the phones. We didn't have the social media. We didn't have the pressures. We didn't have all this stuff. Like we had our own crap,
right.
But we didn't have the same stuff they have. So we don't understand. So every generation is just relearning to parent to go with the world and all the changes going on out there.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's just about like, at least for me, the more work I've done on myself, right? And I've gone on meditation retreats, I've gone on pilgrimages, I've gone to therapy, I've experimented with plant medicines. Like the more work I do on myself, the less anger I experience, the less frustration, the less, right, the better I learn how to deal with grief, the better I learn how to deal with shame, the more compassionate I can become to be a vehicle or a space for other people to do their work. Instead of like, oh no, you need, right? Instead of creating this like negative energy of like you versus them or me, whatever it is, of like being spacious, right? And like, yeah, there's nothing about you that's going to trigger something in me because I've done my own work. And by that, I can be a space for you to do the healing that you need to do without judgment, without criticism, and with compassion, right? And so if we can do that for our kids, if we can do that for our partners, I think if we each individually do the work we need to do on ourselves, then we can start to show up for other people in the world in a different way. And it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't need therapy, but everybody can benefit from it.
Love that.
Yes.
Or we go because the people around us won't.
Exactly. Exactly.
Help me help you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this has been absolutely wonderful. I love your insights. I love the way that you have just put all of your background, your knowledge, your experience together, and you're out there trying to help people and normalize counseling, normalize recognizing your feelings, and giving people a path to continue their progress and their journey. I just think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
You're focusing on some super important people, which we all thank you for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you both for this work that you're doing, right? Because every conversation is a conversation in the right direction. And the more people we educate and the more people that understand these principles. So really, just grateful to be here, honored to have been on your show, and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you. And we are going to post this podcast and we will link your website and all the ways that people can reach you in the description. Till next time, though, thank you, Dr. Garcia, and we will see you next week.
Thank you so much.